I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The private meeting lasted less than 40 minutes. Yet the decision made inside that silent room threatened to alter the balance of the royal family. Catherine did not summon advisors, secretaries, or senior courtiers. She asked for Princess Anne alone. Then, with her voice controlled but her hands visibly tense, she placed a sealed letter on the table and revealed exactly what she feared the palace was preparing to do. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine requested the meeting at Windsor, after discovering that officials were preparing a confidential plan to accelerate William's workload while she focused on recovery and family. The Wales household, the private team managing them, risked being reshaped without her voice. Whoever controlled William's diary could influence his priorities and reduce his time with George, Charlotte, and Louis. Anne entered expecting a conversation about Catherine's health. Instead, the closed door changed everything. The Princess Royal understood that Catherine wanted protection, not comfort. She watched the younger woman remain composed as fear sharpened every word. Catherine pushed the envelope across the table, but kept 2 fingers resting on it. Inside was a written directive asking Anne to stop the palace from forcing William into an expanded schedule, prevent courtiers from seizing control of the household, and protect the children from pressure surrounding the succession. Succession meant the legal order determining who inherits the crown, but for this family it also meant duty, scrutiny, and childhoods shaped by expectation. William, Catherine confessed, would accept every demand without complaint. He would call it service, even if it left him exhausted and absent from home. Anne knew that danger. She had watched duty reward endurance, while quietly consuming those who carried it. The request placed her in a brutal position. Anne loved the crown, but she could not ignore the woman before her. Blocking the plan could bring her into conflict with powerful courtiers, and possibly King Charles himself. Catherine then revealed through the sealed account that the proposal was moving toward approval. One senior figure wanted it confirmed before William understood how permanent the changes might become. The letter also named officials Catherine believed were exploiting uncertainty around her condition. Only after Anne promised to read it alone did Catherine release the envelope. As she slipped it into her folder, Catherine warned that the strongest resistance would come from inside the family. Anne left the room carrying Catherine's secret. But before she could decide what to do with it, she had to confront the painful truth about what William, Charles, and Catherine each stood to lose. To the public, Catherine, William, and Anne represented discipline, duty, and royal stability. Behind the palace walls, however, each was carrying a different fear. Catherine feared losing control of her family's future. William feared failing both his wife and the crown. Anne feared that protecting them might require her to challenge the institution she had defended for her entire life. Catherine stood at the emotional center of the crisis, because her reduced public presence had created a dangerous vacuum. Palace planners were already debating how William's duties should evolve if the uncertainty continued, and every new responsibility threatened to pull him further from home. The crown meant the institution of the monarchy itself, but inside their family, it also meant an endless demand to place public service before private pain. William felt that pressure more deeply than anyone realized. He remained determined to support Charles while protecting Catherine, yet his instinct was always to absorb the burden rather than admit it had become too great. The future king believed endurance was proof of strength. His wife feared that same strength could be used to break him. Catherine carried guilt alongside fear. She knew Anne had spent decades performing relentless duties without seeking sympathy, applause, or relief. The Princess Royal had become a symbol of endurance, and asking her to intervene felt almost cruel. Still, Catherine believed William would reject protection from advisors, challenge courtiers, and even argue with his father. But he would listen when his aunt spoke with complete honesty. Anne left Windsor with the sealed envelope resting inside her folder. She entered the waiting car but did not tell the driver to move. For several long minutes, she stared down at Catherine's letter, anger tightening beneath her silence. The burden should never have reached that room. It should never have fallen into the hands of a woman already fighting to protect her health, her marriage, and her children. Anne remembered how the monarchy had consumed private grief before. She had seen spouses expected to remain composed, children asked to understand absence, and wounded people told that duty could not wait. Opening the envelope would turn her from a trusted listener into an active participant. Once she read the names, neutrality would disappear. That evening, William noticed that Catherine had become unusually quiet. He asked whether something had happened, choosing his words carefully as he watched her expression. She told him only that she had made certain their family would not be left unprotected. The prince heard reassurance in her answer, but he also heard something else, a decision already made without him. Anne finally broke the seal later that night. She read the first line, then the first name, and her face changed. Catherine's fear had not begun during their Windsor meeting. It had been building for far longer. The letter exposed the immediate danger, but the real origin of Catherine's decision lay in an earlier royal ceremony, where one calculated instruction changed everything. The crisis did not begin with a sealed letter or a private Windsor meeting. It began weeks earlier, during what should have been a controlled display of royal unity. Catherine had watched from a private room as William was quietly handed a revised schedule. One line on that document revealed that palace officials were no longer merely supporting the future king, they were beginning to plan his life without her. William had been called into a side chamber after a national remembrance ceremony, where senior officials presented him with a proposed 6-month program of additional investitures, overseas meetings, state briefings, and regional engagements. Investitures are formal ceremonies where members of the royal family present honors on behalf of the monarch. The new program looked temporary on paper, but its demands would have taken the prince away from home for long stretches during Catherine's recovery. Catherine entered moments later and understood the danger immediately. Her household had not been consulted, even though the schedule would reshape family life and place greater pressure on George, Charlotte, and Louis. One senior official turned to William and said, "The institution cannot pause for private circumstances." Those words changed everything. Her health, marriage, and children had just been reduced to obstacles standing in the way of palace efficiency. William remained calm. He lowered his eyes to the document and began reviewing the dates, believing that accepting the burden would support Charles and prevent uncertainty from spreading. The future king saw sacrifice as protection. Catherine saw something else. She saw officials using his loyalty to make decisions he would never willingly make for himself. Silence became her only defense in that crowded room. Catherine did not challenge the courtiers while they stood around William, but the restraint on her face unsettled him. He knew that expression. She was not merely upset, she had recognized a line being crossed. The door closed behind the officials, and Catherine immediately lifted the schedule. She took the pen from the table, drew a firm line through 3 consecutive overseas commitments, and set it down with a finality that surprised her husband. William asked who had authorized the program. She asked why their family had been excluded. William then revealed through the written briefing that the plan had come from a private strategic group. That group was a small circle of senior advisors, created to prepare the monarchy for a faster transfer of responsibility from Charles to his heir. The prince admitted that several members believed the crown could not afford to wait for private life to stabilize. Catherine read deeper and found the detail that hardened her resolve. Anne had been deliberately excluded because certain advisors feared she would object to treating William as an institutional solution rather than a husband and father. That discovery transformed Catherine's fear into action. Her sealed letter would therefore ask Anne to do more than stop the schedule. It would demand that she enter the group, challenge its decisions, and identify the royal figure who had quietly approved its work. Armed with the truth, Anne refused to send a polite objection through secretaries. She requested a face-to-face meeting, where silence would no longer protect anyone. Princess Anne did not raise her voice when she entered the king's private study. She did something far more unsettling. She closed the door herself, placed Catherine's sealed letter on Charles's desk, and remained standing. The king recognized his sister's expression immediately. This was not a courtesy visit. and she had not come to request permission. She had come to demand an answer. Charles had authorized preliminary succession readiness discussions because his own health and Catherine's recovery were already affecting the royal calendar. Succession readiness meant preparing the next heir to assume greater responsibility if the monarch became unable to carry the full burden. To the king, the meetings had seemed cautious. To Anne, they had become a quiet seizure of control. He had not designed every detail of William's proposed schedule, but his approval had opened the door. Senior officials had moved forward without consulting the Wales household, and Catherine had been left to discover decisions about her husband after they were already taking shape. Anne placed one hand on the desk and told Charles exactly what that failure had caused. Catherine had been forced to write a defensive letter during the most vulnerable period of her family's life because the palace was treating temporary illness as permission to make permanent choices. Charles pushed back at once. He insisted that duty, not cruelty, had guided him. The monarch feared that uncertainty would grow if William was not seen accepting more responsibility. He believed visibility would calm the public and protect the crown. Anne did not soften. She told him that exhausting the future king was not continuity. It was the same old mistake, asking a son to prove loyalty by sacrificing the people who needed him most. Charles opened Catherine's letter and began reading. His face tightened on the first page. He slowly removed his glasses when he reached the list of names, then placed the document flat against the desk as though its weight had suddenly changed. One name belonged to a senior advisor he had trusted to coordinate the transition between his household and William's. That transition was supposed to create cooperation between the king's team and the prince's future court. Catherine's documented account, however, described something more dangerous, an attempt to centralize control before William could build an independent circle around himself. Anne then revealed what had disturbed her most. The proposed schedule contained private assumptions about Catherine's future capacity, assumptions never discussed with her, her doctors, or her household. The plan was not merely insensitive, it was building strategy around a woman's health without allowing that woman to speak. Charles fell silent. Then he admitted that another family member had encouraged him to approve the strategic group, arguing that William needed distance from emotional influence whenever decisions about the crown were made. The confrontation exposed Charles's responsibility, but Anne now needed to discover who had transformed cautious planning into a struggle for control over William's future. The most dangerous royal battles are rarely fought beneath chandeliers or before assembled cameras. They unfold through diary changes, briefing papers, carefully selected advisors, and decisions described as temporary until no one can reverse them. Catherine had recognized that pattern. Anne now saw it too. Someone was building a new structure around William and doing it while his attention remained fixed on his wife. The strategic group had begun as a temporary answer to uncertainty, but its reach had quietly widened. It now influenced staffing, travel, constitutional briefings, and the advice placed before the prince. Constitutional briefings were private updates explaining the duties and limits attached to royal authority. Whoever controlled those papers could shape what William knew, whom he trusted, and how much time remained for his family. William received Anne in a small sitting room and sensed the danger before she spoke. The future king became guarded when his aunt asked who had approved the recent changes to his diary. He knew she was not asking casually. She knew more than he did. Anne told him about Catherine's letter and refused to soften the truth. William felt betrayed that his wife had gone around him, but the anger did not last. He understood why she had done it. Catherine knew he would accept sacrifice before admitting he needed protection. The Princess Royal did not apologize for reading the document. She told William that Catherine had not acted against him. She had acted because his loyalty could be used against him, and because every new duty pulled him further from the people he was trying to protect. William opened his diary and studied 3 pages of newly inserted commitments. The schedule looked orderly, almost harmless. Then he saw how many family evenings, school days, and recovery periods had been erased. He tore out the provisional copy and placed the pieces on the table instead of returning them to his secretary. Anne then revealed what the documented account had exposed. The advisor named by Catherine had held private discussions with Queen Camilla about preserving stability and preventing the Wales household from becoming too independent. The Queen Consort had not framed it as an attack. She believed a centralized household would protect Charles's authority during a fragile period. That belief carried a hidden cost. It would limit Catherine's future influence, keep William dependent on the king's existing team, and make every major decision pass through people chosen before the Wales household could build its own strength. William's disappointment hardened into resolve. He would not send another confidential objection that could be delayed, edited, or ignored. He would cancel the proposed schedule openly inside the household and force every official involved to choose a side. Once William rejected the plan, the conflict could no longer remain contained in private folders, and the first consequences reached Catherine before the palace could regain control. William's decision traveled through the palace before the torn schedule had even been removed from his desk. Meetings were cancelled. Calls went unanswered. Officials who had spoken confidently about continuity suddenly denied ownership of the plan. Yet the most painful consequence was not administrative. Catherine learned that her private appeal to Anne had become known, and she realized someone had broken the trust surrounding their final conversation. William formally rejected the expanded program and instructed his private secretary that no long-term commitments would be accepted without direct consultation with Catherine and their household. A private secretary is the senior aide who manages a royal figure's official work, advice, and schedule. That order mattered because control of the diary had become control of the family's future. Charles moved just as quickly. He suspended the strategic group and ordered an internal review into how assumptions about Catherine's health had entered official planning documents. The king wanted answers, but the damage was already spreading. Courtiers were no longer discussing whether the plan had gone too far. They were asking who had exposed it. Catherine felt relief when she learned that William had defended their family, yet that relief was poisoned by betrayal. Details from her private appeal were already circulating among senior officials. Her fear for her husband and children had been turned into palace gossip. William approached her without anger, though the hurt remained. He admitted that he had initially felt excluded because Catherine had trusted Anne before trusting him with the full danger. She told the prince that she had feared he would defend the institution before defending himself. He did not deny it. William sat beside her and removed the copied schedule from his jacket. He folded it once, then again, and told Catherine that no diary entry would ever matter more than returning home as a husband and father. The promise eased one wound, but it could not explain who had leaked her words. Camilla received notice of the suspension while preparing for an engagement. She dismissed her aides and remained alone with the message. The Queen Consort understood that the decision weakened the structure she had supported, but she also knew suspicion would now fall on everyone who had entered Charles's confidence. Anne discovered something worse through a time-stamped internal summary. The document had been produced before Charles finished reading Catherine's letter, meaning someone with access to the king's study had expected the confrontation and prepared to control the story. The leaked summary removed every reference to William's exhaustion and the children. It made Catherine appear focused only on protecting her authority. Anne recognized the danger immediately. Unless that distortion was stopped, the woman trying to protect her family could be recast as the cause of the crisis. With trust collapsing around them, Catherine and Anne met once more without aides, documents, or royal machinery between them, and that conversation changed the meaning of everything. Their second conversation was nothing like the first. There was no sealed letter between them, no list of names, and no demand for immediate action. Catherine and Anne sat alone, as two women shaped by the same institution in different generations. For the first time, Catherine admitted that her greatest fear was not losing influence. It was watching duty take William away from his children, one obligation at a time. Anne had arranged the meeting after tracing how Catherine's intentions had been twisted inside the palace. An appeal for family protection had been recast as a fight for power, and that distortion threatened more than one reputation. It could divide William from his wife, harden Charles against his son, and place Camilla at the center of a conflict she had not fully created. Catherine understood the trap. If she denied every rumor, the crisis would grow with each new answer. If she remained silent, others would define her motives for her. The princess knew that royal silence, the tradition of refusing to answer private controversy, could protect dignity, but it could also allow a lie to become accepted truth. Anne asked the question directly. With no aides present, she wanted to know whether Catherine still wished the letter to be enforced now that William had rejected the schedule himself. The younger woman hesitated. Then she admitted that she regretted placing Anne between Charles and William. Fear had driven her, and she worried that fear had deepened a fracture already running through the family. Anne refused to let guilt take control. She told Catherine that asking for protection was not weakness. The real failure belonged to a system that had made a wife believe she needed secret intervention to protect her husband from his own sense of duty. Catherine reached for the original letter, intending to destroy it. Anne placed her hand over the document and stopped her. The Princess Royal said the family needed to remember how close it had come to repeating an old pattern, one in which service was praised while private suffering was ignored. Anne then revealed through a time-stamped security account and internal access record that she had traced the distorted summary to an ambitious courtier. He had hoped to weaken both Catherine and Camilla, leaving himself indispensable to Charles and William as the only man capable of managing the chaos he had helped create. Catherine did not ask for public humiliation. She requested that the courtier be removed quietly, and that a written household rule prevent health-related assumptions from entering strategic planning without the person's consent. Anne agreed. Their decision gave Charles a path toward unity, but time was almost gone. By sunrise, the private struggle had become a national story, and one image outside Windsor captured the public's verdict before the palace issued a single word. The leak escaped the palace shortly before midnight. By morning, Catherine and Anne's private conversation was no longer protected by stone walls or royal silence. Broadcasters interrupted their schedules, commentators debated the future of the monarchy, and newspaper editors chose sides. Yet beneath the noise, the public response centered on one simple question. Had Catherine defended her own position, or had she protected her family from the crown? The first accounts distorted everything. They described Catherine as recruiting Anne into a campaign for greater control over William's future role, while palace officials refused to discuss the sealed letter. That silence created an information vacuum, a gap where no official explanation exists, allowing speculation to become the dominant story. The longer the palace waited, the more the false version hardened. One major newspaper appeared with Catherine and Anne shown at separate engagements beneath the headline, "With the promise behind closed doors." A smaller caption asked whether the Princess Royal had stopped a plan to overwhelm William. The front page changed the mood instantly. What had seemed like a private power struggle now looked like a family fighting over the cost of duty. By midday, a quiet crowd had gathered near the gates of Windsor Castle. Several people held handwritten signs reading, "Family is duty too." Their message transformed the argument. The public was no longer asking who had won inside the palace. They were asking whether the monarchy had forgotten that husbands, wives, and children could be harmed by the same service it praised. William watched the coverage from home. The prince remained controlled, until one commentator described Catherine's action not as ambition, but as the choice of a wife who knew her husband would never protect himself from excessive duty. He lowered his head and stayed silent. The future king finally heard his private struggle spoken aloud. Charles understood the danger. A defensive statement would appear cold, but admitting the truth would expose serious failures within his household. The king knew every word could protect the crown or deepen the wound. Anne advised him to abandon carefully crafted denials. She urged the monarch to confirm that long-term changes to William's role had been rejected after family consultation. Her message was simple. Honesty would hurt briefly, but silence could damage them for years. The response came quickly. The courtier responsible for distorting Catherine's letter was removed from all succession planning responsibilities, and the strategic group was permanently dissolved. Succession planning meant preparing how royal duties would pass to the next generation. But this version had become a tool of control. Charles then invited Catherine, William, Anne, and Camilla to one final meeting. He did not call them together to assign blame. He called them to decide what the monarchy would learn from the damage. The public had delivered its emotional judgment, but only the family's final decision could determine whether Catherine's secret appeal became another royal wound or the moment that finally broke an inherited cycle. The final meeting did not end with victory for Catherine, defeat for Camilla, or humiliation for Charles. It ended with something far rarer inside royal life: an admission that duty had been allowed to move faster than compassion. The sealed letter had exposed a dangerous instinct within the monarchy: the belief that its future could be secured by silently increasing the burden carried by those already sacrificing the most. Charles spoke first. He confirmed that no permanent expansion of William's responsibilities would ever again be approved without direct consultation with both the prince and Catherine. The proposal that had triggered the crisis was finished. A new household protocol, a written rule governing how royal staff make official decisions, would now require health, family welfare, and the needs of George, Charlotte, and Louis to be considered before any major change to William's program. The king then turned to Catherine and apologized. He admitted that officials had discussed her future as though she were a problem to manage, rather than a person whose voice mattered. Charles had acted from fear for continuity, fear of uncertainty, and fear that the monarchy might appear weak. Yet he now understood that protecting the institution, while ignoring the family at its center, would create a deeper weakness. Catherine accepted his apology, but she did not soften the truth. She told the monarch that fear could never again be used to separate William from his children, or remove her from decisions shaping their lives. The princess had not fought for greater status. She had fought for the right to protect the people she loved. Anne reached for the original sealed letter and returned it to Catherine. The younger woman considered destroying it, then placed it in William's hands. The future king stored it inside a private family box, not as evidence of betrayal, but as a reminder of the boundary they had nearly failed to defend. Camilla also acknowledged her part. The queen consort admitted that supporting a centralized household had underestimated Catherine's influence and the independence the Wales family needed. She did not lose her place, but she accepted that William and his wife must prepare for their future together, not under the control of another household. Anne's intervention had never been about crowning one side over another. She had forced the monarchy to face a brutal truth: continuity without humanity would eventually destroy the very people expected to preserve it. The strategic plan was abandoned. The official who manipulated the dispute was permanently dismissed, and authority over William's schedule returned fully to the Wales household. Catherine's private talk mattered because it transformed fear into lasting change. She protected her husband, defended her children, and proved that safeguarding the crown sometimes means refusing to let it consume the family carrying its future. The letter began as Catherine's desperate safeguard, but it ended as a promise shared by the entire family. The future of the monarchy would no longer be built by sacrificing the people destined to carry it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.